The mystery of Noah's Ark.
The story of Noah's Ark is told in the biblical book of Genesis. After God creates the universe and mankind begins with Adam and Eve, they go on to populate the earth.
On September 5th, 1960, a magazine landed on the coffee tables of millions of American households. It was an ordinary issue of Life magazine, and buried inside it was a photograph that would derail one man's entire life. The image showed an aerial view of something on a remote Turkish mountainside, a shape pressed into the earth, unmistakably curved at both ends, raised along its spine, measuring roughly the length of 1.5 football fields. The caption suggested it might be the outline of Noah's Ark, the picture that started everything. Ron Wyatt was working as a nurse anesthetist in a hospital in Madison, Tennessee when he saw that picture. The widespread speculation in evangelical Christian circles that this might be Noah's Ark started Wyatt on his career as an amateur archaeologist. He was 27 years old. He had a young family, a steady medical job, and no formal training in archaeology, geology, or any related discipline. And yet, from the moment he saw that photograph, something locked into place in his mind. The shape in those mountains was not a geological accident. He was certain of it. It would take him 17 more years to get there. When he finally did, what he found, or claimed to find, shook his faith, scrambled his relationships, and made him one of the most controversial figures in the history of biblical archaeology. From 1977 until his death in 1999, he made over 100 trips to the Middle East. He spent his vacation days, his savings, and ultimately his health on a single question. Was there a ship buried inside that mountain? The answer, depending on who you ask, is either the most important archaeological discovery in human history or a case study in how deeply a person can deceive themselves. The mountain that had been waiting. Before Ron Wyatt ever set foot in Turkey, the formation had already made news and already been dismissed. The site was discovered in 1959 by Turkish cartographer Captain İlhan Durupaynar after severe rains and earthquakes exposed the formation. He was reviewing aerial photographs taken as part of a NATO geodetic survey of Turkey when he noticed a shape that didn't belong. It was boat-like. It sat at roughly 6,300 feet above sea level in the Agri province of eastern Anatolia, close to the Iranian border. The site is 16 kilometers southeast of Doğubayazit in the Agri province and 29 kilometers south of the greater Mount Ararat summit, at an elevation of 1,966 to 2,004 meters above sea level. The announcement caused a sensation. An expedition reached the site in 1960, including a team that brought along journalists and even used dynamite to probe the interior. After 2 days of digging inside the boat-shaped formation, the disappointed expedition members found only dirt, rocks, and more dirt. The official news release concluded that there were no visible archaeological remains, and that this formation was a natural geological structure. The world moved on. The site was filed away. The photograph, however, found Ron Wyatt. The site was then ignored until 1977, when it was rediscovered and promoted by Ron Wyatt. He came with his 2 teenage sons, traveling by bus, train, and taxi over 4 days to reach the remote village of Doğubayazit. What he found waiting for him on that hillside was not an obvious shipwreck. There were no exposed timbers, no rusted fittings, no carvings in the stone. There was a large oblong mound rising from the hillside, its edges tracing a long oval that tapered at both ends. It sat in the middle of what appeared to be a dried mud flow. Up close, it looked like a hill. From above, it looked like something else entirely. Wyatt looked at it and, by every account, became immediately and completely convinced he was standing on Noah's Ark. The man who believed. To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Ron Wyatt was. Ronald Eldon Wyatt was an American nurse anesthetist who gained notoriety as an amateur biblical archaeologist for claiming to have discovered nearly 100 sites and artifacts related to the Bible, including the remains of Noah's Ark at the Durapinar site in Turkey, the Ark of the Covenant beneath Jerusalem, and chariot wheels from the biblical Red Sea crossing. He founded Wyatt Archaeological Research and spent over 2 decades traveling to the Middle East, conducting investigations and promoting his findings through videos, books, and lectures without formal training in archaeology. Wyatt's religious affiliation was with the Seventh-day Adventist sect. The most thorough expose of his claims was produced by 2 scholars of his own denomination, Russell R. and Colin D. Standish, identical twin ministers who co-authored Holy Relics or Revelation, Recent Astounding Archaeological Claims Evaluated. He was not a fraudster in the conventional sense, someone cold and calculating who knew the evidence was thin and pushed it anyway for profit. People who knew him in person described something stranger than that. A colleague who spent time with Wyatt at the site wrote that he was a tall, impressive, bearded figure, striding around with great self-assurance, and that he seemed to genuinely believe everything he was saying. He concluded that Wyatt was not a deliberate liar, but someone whose mind had undergone a kind of internal transcription, coming to believe as true certain ideas that were, in fact, his own inventions. That psychological profile matters enormously, because it explains the pattern of what followed. Wyatt did not invent claims out of thin air and then cover his tracks. He looked at ambiguous physical evidence, a rounded rock, a discolored soil sample, a reading on a metal detector, and he saw exactly what he needed to see. Then he described what he saw with absolute confidence to anyone who would listen. And for a while, a great many people listened. The evidence he claimed to find between 1977 and the early 1990s, Wyatt returned to the Durapinar site repeatedly, each time claiming to extract or detect new evidence that the mound was the petrified remains of a massive wooden ship. His claims stacked up quickly. Wyatt claimed to have recovered metal rivets, metal slag, petrified wood, animal hair, and coprolite from the site. He also made a site survey using metal detectors and a ground-penetrating radar instrument, and claimed the results showed a regular grid of metal objects. That grid, he argued, corresponded to the internal structural framework of a ship, the ribs, beams, and crossmembers that would have held a vessel of that scale together. The metal detector readings, in his interpretation, were not random noise in the soil. They were a map. He went further. The items he showed publicly included a single specimen 18 inches long, said to be petrified wood, and further alleged to be laminated, a small object said to be a fossilized metal rivet, and printouts of radar scans and lab analyses done on the alleged samples. The laminated wood claim was particularly significant. If a piece of ancient timber could be confirmed as deliberately bonded from multiple layers, as pre-modern shipbuilders had done, it would be difficult to explain as a natural formation. Wyatt said the lab results confirmed it. He said the carbon readings inside the formation were dramatically higher than those outside, proving decayed wood lay beneath the surface. He also pointed to a cluster of large stones found near a village several miles from the formation. Each stone was roughly rectangular, flat, and heavy, some weighing several tons, with a hole bored through the top. Wyatt, aided by David Fassold and others, interpreted the artifacts as drogues, stone weights used to stabilize the ark in rough seas, because they all have a chamfered shape that would reduce drag. He named them anchor stones. He gave lectures with photographs. He published a book. He made videos. Evangelical communities across America passed them around. He also made a claim that no one who heard it ever quite forgot. While probing a crack in the surface of the formation, He said he looked down into a cavity and saw corroded metal brackets still attached to what appeared to be structural timbers. He had, he told people, looked directly into the hull of Noah's Ark. The collapse of the evidence. The problem was that every piece of physical evidence Wyatt produced fell apart under proper analysis, starting with the petrified wood. Lab tests on the specimen returned results consistent with the chemical composition of the major local rock type, basalt. Contrary to Wyatt's claims, very little petrified wood has been found at the Durupinar site. The segment, claimed to be a deck timber of laminated planks, had actually been identified as basalt. A laboratory report cited as proof did not test the sample in a way that could identify it as petrified wood. The rivet was equally problematic. The object, described by Wyatt as a metal rivet, only exhibited a vaguely round shape. Soil samples from the site contained just the kinds of metals to be expected in soil developed from basalt, not from forged materials. Carbon at the site was in mineral form, not the organic form expected from decayed wood. The geophysical work was no more convincing. When geophysicist John Baumgartner accompanied Wyatt to the site and subjected the whole area to minute scrutiny, including a survey with penetrating radar, he found nothing to support the claim of internal cavities Wyatt had described. Baumgartner, a creationist scientist from the Los Alamos National Laboratory who would have been deeply motivated to confirm the discovery, came away without confirmation. And then there were the anchor stones. A geological investigation of samples from the stones, published by geologist Lawrence Collins in co-authorship with their original discoverer David Fasold, found that they are of local rock and thus could not have been brought from Mesopotamia, the Ark's supposed place of origin. The carbon argument also unraveled. Wyatt used lab reports showing that the carbon percentages were different within the formation, 4.95%, and outside the formation, 1.88%, claiming this positively proved it was composed of very ancient wood and metal. What Wyatt did not tell his readers was that both of these carbon percentages fall within the normal bounds of soil and do not show evidence of wood. As for the metal brackets in the cavity he claimed to have seen, the geophysicist who surveyed the site simply and flatly denied they existed. When the eyewitness report of Wyatt's alleged sighting was described to John Baumgartner, he simply laughed and dismissed it, assuring the questioner beyond any doubt that the site revealed no such cavitation, and that the description given was entirely a fabrication. The formation itself, according to the geologists who examined it most carefully, was not a shipwreck at all. In 1996, Fasold co-wrote a paper with geologist Lawrence Collins titled "Bogus Noah's Ark: From Turkey Exposed as a Common Geologic Structure," which concluded that the boat-shaped formation was a natural stone formation that merely resembled a boat. The paper pointed out that the anchors were local volcanic stone. The abstract reads, "Supposed metal-braced walls are natural concentrations of limonite and magnetite in steeply inclined sedimentary layers in the limbs of a doubly plunging syncline." That paper was co-authored by the same David Fasold, who had initially stood on the site in 1985 and declared it a shipwreck. His reversal was complete. The man who had once been Wyatt's closest partner at the site had spent a decade looking at the evidence and concluded it wasn't there. What the science actually shows. The Durupinar formation is made primarily of limonite, a yellowish-brown iron ore mineral, embedded in the limbs of a folded sedimentary rock structure called a doubly plunging syncline. This is a geological configuration in which layers of rock have been compressed and folded so that they curve downward toward a central axis at both ends. When erosion strips away the surrounding terrain, the edges of the syncline can be exposed as a raised rim around a central depression. Seen from above, that shape is an elongated oval. It tightens at both ends. It looks like a hull, The predominant geological explanation is that it is a syncline composed of sedimentary rocks, with its particular shape created by landslide processes and erosion. The alleged artificial structures are interpreted as natural concentrations of minerals like limonite and magnetite, or natural fractures in the rock. The site sits on the slopes of Mount Tenderek, an active volcanic region. The surrounding terrain is characterized by periodic mudflows from the slopes above. The formation's elongated shape and raised rim are consistent with a section of the original cliff that slid downhill and settled into its current position, the edges hardening into the limonite-rich walls that first caught Captain Durupinar's eye from altitude in 1959. Dr. Salih Bayraktutan, a Turkish geologist who conducted core drilling at the site, concluded that the features were entirely natural. The Turkish government initially promoted the Durupinar site in the 1980s, even declaring it a national park. However, after scientific investigations, they retracted their support. Today, a small visitor center stands at the site, and it draws tourists who come to look at the formation for themselves. The Turkish state does not claim it is an ark. It makes no attempt to excavate it for biblical artifacts. It treats it as a geological curiosity with a compelling backstory. One measurement, however, has never stopped generating attention. Genesis 6:15 states the length of the ark shall be 300 cubits. The Durupinar formation measures approximately 164 meters, 538 feet, in length. Calculated using the Egyptian cubit, the unit of measurement most commonly attributed to Moses, 300 cubits works out to approximately 515 feet. The site is in the right ballpark. That coincidence is the single most credible thing about it, and it is the hook that every subsequent wave of researchers has hung their arguments on. The width is another matter. The biblical ark was specified at 50 cubits, roughly 86 feet. The Durupinar formation is 138 feet wide, nearly 60% broader than the scriptural dimensions. Wyatt's explanation was that the outer walls had been pushed outward by the weight of sediment pressing down over millennia, splaying the hull like a collapsed barrel. His critics pointed out that petrified wood does not behave that way, and that this kind of post hoc adjustment of inconvenient measurements to fit a predetermined conclusion is not archaeology, the broader architecture of Wyatt's claims. The Noah's Ark discovery was not even the most extreme of Ron Wyatt's claims. It was merely the first. Over the following 2 decades, he kept going. By the time of his death in 1999, Wyatt claimed to have discovered the location of Sodom and Gomorrah and the other cities of the plain, sulfur and brimstone balls from the ashen remains of Sodom and Gomorrah, the site of the Israelites' crossing of the Red Sea in the Gulf of Aqaba, chariot wheels and other relics of the army of Pharaoh at the bottom of the Red Sea, the site of the biblical Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia at Jabal al-Lawz, and a chamber at the end of a maze of tunnels under Jerusalem, containing artifacts from Solomon's temple, including the Ark of the Covenant. He also claimed to have collected a blood sample from the crucifixion site beneath Jerusalem and to have had it analyzed, finding only 24 chromosomes rather than the expected 46, which he interpreted as confirmation of the virgin birth. Wyatt's claims were described by some fellow creationists as fraudulent, and by a representative of the Israel Antiquities Authority as falling into the category of trash which one finds in tabloids such as the National Enquirer. They are not considered credible by professional archaeologists and biblical scholars. The Council of the Garden Tomb Association in London totally refuted the claim of Wyatt to have discovered the original Ark of the Covenant or any other biblical artifacts within the boundaries of the area known as the Garden Tomb Jerusalem. Though Wyatt was allowed to dig within the privately owned garden on a number of occasions, staff members observed his progress and entered his excavated shaft. As far as they were aware, nothing was ever discovered to support his claims, nor had they seen any evidence of biblical artifacts or temple treasures. The pattern was the same in every case. Wyatt would arrive at a site with enormous personal conviction. He would conduct his own survey, often using equipment not appropriate for the task, metal detectors, a device he called a frequency generator that critics compared to a water divining rod, informal GPR readings interpreted without peer review. He would extract a small number of samples. He would commission lab tests, often from laboratories not specialists in the relevant field. He would selectively report results that supported his conclusions, and then he would give lectures, sell videos, and refuse to provide the physical samples to independent analysts. Wyatt's claims were described by some fellow creationists as fraudulent. The sharpest criticism, notably, did not come from secular scientists who might have been ideologically opposed to biblical archaeology. It came from within his own denomination, from trained archaeologists and scholars in the Seventh-day Adventist Church who shared his faith, believed the Bible to be literal history, and had every motivation to want his discoveries to be real. The ground cracks open again. Ron Wyatt died on August 4, 1999, at the age of 66, of cancer at Baptist Central Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. He spent his final weeks insisting that the Ark was real, the covenant was found, and that God had shown him everything. The site he had spent his life promoting did not die with him. In the mountains of eastern Turkey, near Mount Ararat, the mysterious boat-shaped formation known as the Durupinar site, first identified in 1959 by Captain Ilhan Durupinar, continues to draw researchers. Its 157-meter-long structure, supporters argue, perfectly matches the biblical description of Noah's Ark found in Genesis 6. In 2014, a joint team from Istanbul Technical University and Agri Ibrahim Sisan University applied electrical resistivity tomography to the site, a geophysical technique that maps subsurface structures through electrical resistance measurements. In 2019, a team collected new 3D ground-penetrating radar data across the full length of the formation. And then, in 2023, that radar data was reanalyzed by independent American researchers associated with a project called Noah's Ark Scans. Using advanced imaging tools, researchers identified a 234-foot-long corridor and symmetrical, right-angled features as deep as 20 feet, which appear to resemble rooms or hallways. The presence of these right-angled formations strongly suggests intelligent design, said Andrew Jones, the lead investigator of the scans. The 2024 soil analysis added another layer. 88 soil samples were collected from 22 locations inside and outside the formation and analyzed at Ataturk University laboratories. Soil within the site showed significantly higher levels of organic matter and potassium compared to surrounding areas. These findings suggest the presence of decayed wood or other organic materials, consistent with a large, ancient structure preserved within the mudflow. Soil within the site showed 3 times more organic matter and 38% higher potassium levels compared to soil just outside the boundary. Jones argues that a decayed wooden structure would leave behind exactly this kind of chemical difference over thousands of years. Tunnels were discovered running down the middle of the boat and alongside the inside edge of the possible ship, leading to a central cavity Jones called the atrium. These voids are lining up below the ground, and they're not just random, Jones said. These tunnels are also following a pattern. The researchers note that the Bible describes Noah's Ark as having 3 internal decks, and that the layout of the detected subsurface structures is consistent with that arrangement. They are careful to say that excavation has not yet occurred, and that these are interpretations of geophysical data, not confirmed physical findings. Their critics are equally careful and equally pointed. Geologists continue to emphasize that the Durupiner Formation is a doubly plunging syncline, and that characteristics interpreted as artificial, such as straight lines or angles, are explainable by rock folding processes, the formation of orthogonal joints, and the precipitation of minerals like limonite along natural fractures. Right angles and linear features are not, by themselves, proof of human construction. They appear in many geological formations. The question is whether the combination of features, the dimensions, the organic soil readings, the subsurface geometry constitutes a pattern that geology cannot explain on its own. That argument remains genuinely open, and the people making it on both sides have relevant expertise. This is not a settled debate, but it is also not a debate on equal footing. The scientific consensus, including among creationist geologists, remains firmly that this is a natural formation. The weight of what was found and not found. There's something important in the gap between what Ron Wyatt believed and what he could actually prove. Wyatt made over 100 trips to the Durupiner site. He spent his time, money, and energy chasing what he believed was Noah's Ark. Every time he returned, he brought new claims about wood, metal, or hidden structures underground. But when experts checked his findings, they didn't hold up. What he thought was wood turned out to be basalt rock. The metal rivets were just natural minerals. The supposed ship-like cavity wasn't confirmed. Even the anchor stones were identified as common volcanic rock from the area. Other researchers had already concluded the site was likely just a natural rock formation. Wyatt's response never really changed. He believed the evidence was being misunderstood or that science wasn't looking closely enough. But that's part of the problem. If a theory explains away every contradiction without changing, it stops being science and starts becoming belief. Still, the site itself is real. Its shape is unusual, and some measurements do loosely match the biblical description. New soil tests and ground scans have shown patterns underground that some experts find interesting. So the question isn't whether the site is worth studying, it is. The real question is whether any of this goes beyond coincidence, and whether the methods used are truly reliable. David Fassold, who once supported Wyatt, eventually changed his mind. After years of research, he concluded the site was just a natural formation, and even co-wrote a scientific paper debunking the Ark claim. What changed his view wasn't bias, it was evidence, and that's how science is meant to work. The question that won't fossilize. The Durupiner site in eastern Turkey sits at the center of a long-running debate between belief and science. On one side, the site has features that attract attention. It lies in a mountainous region often linked to the biblical Mount Ararat area, mentioned in Genesis 8:4, as the resting place of Noah's Ark. The formation is also unusually shaped and roughly matches the Ark's described length. Some modern ground scans have shown underground patterns that a few researchers think could suggest man-made structures. Recent soil studies, 2024, also reported chemical differences between the inside of the formation and the surrounding ground. On the other side, decades of geological research strongly disagree with the Ark idea. Most peer-reviewed studies describe the formation as a natural, doubly plunging syncline, made of sedimentary rock shaped by mud flows and erosion. No verified wood, metal parts, or excavated artifacts have ever been found. Claims made by early investigators were repeatedly tested and did not hold up under independent scientific analysis. Ron Wyatt became the most well-known supporter of the Ark theory at the site. He believed deeply that he had found evidence, but his interpretations were never confirmed by mainstream science. Over time, many of his claims were shown to be incorrect or unverified. His approach often treated uncertain signals as proof, while dismissing opposing scientific results. This created a cycle where belief replaced testing. Even so, the broader idea of ancient flood stories is not unique to one culture. Myths of great floods appear in many civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Greece, India, and indigenous traditions. Some researchers suggest these stories may come from real ancient flooding events, such as rising sea levels after the last ice age or large regional floods in areas like the Black Sea and Persian Gulf. The key question remains unresolved. Is Durpanar something meaningful beneath the surface, or just a natural formation that resembles a ship? Until proper excavation happens, it remains a place suspended between faith, interpretation, and scientific uncertainty. If you found this interesting, subscribe for more deep explorations into mysteries where history, science, and human imagination collide.